So when we're studying churchgoers and we look at those that are in groups every week or almost every week compared to those that are not in groups, we see huge differences. Those people who are in groups are much more active in evangelism, much more active in service, both inside the church and outside the church.
Hey everyone, welcome to Lifeway's State of Groups webinar. I'm Carol Pipes, I'll be your host. With me today are Scott McConnell, the Executive Director of Lifeway Research, and Ken Braddy, Lifeway's Director of Sunday School. Guys, welcome. Thanks for being here with us.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
You're welcome. So together, we are going to walk through Lifeway Research's recent study on groups ministry. This was a comprehensive study that focused on how churches are conducting groups, how they're leading those groups, the logistics of those groups, what they call those groups. Scott, we're going to dig into all the stats. Ken, you're going to provide some great insight on that throughout this webinar. If you want to look at all the data and really dig into all the numbers, you can go to lifewayresearch.com and find that research on the website. Also, at the end of the webinar, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So be sure and use that Q&A function that's in Zoom to send us your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can at the end. But before we get started, Scott, tell us a little bit of the background of this study, who you surveyed, how you did the survey, and just some of those details of the methodology.
Sure. Lifeway Research surveyed 1,021 adult Bible study groups ministry leaders. That's like the longest title of research subjects ever. But these are people everywhere from pastors to volunteers to staff members in between that lead the groups ministry at different churches, Protestant churches. There's no perfect list of those, so Lifeway utilized internal lists as well as external lists to really try to cover the gamut of Protestant churches. We did oversample Southern Baptists and then weighted them back down to their correct size as we finalized the data. But we feel like we've got a good snapshot of groups ministry in Protestant churches.
And when we're talking about groups ministry, what does that mean?
Well, we're about to, I think as we dive into the data, I think we'll reveal that because we ask them like their names for things. Okay. But all the data we're going to share today, even though the study was a little broader, all the data today is about adult ongoing groups.
Okay.
And so 94% of churches have ongoing groups that are meeting throughout the year.
Right.
And so we're going to focus on those.
And they use various names for those, which you guys asked that question. So we're going to find out what the majority of churches are using as the name for their groups, whether it's small group, Sunday school, adult Bible study group, that sort of thing. So I won't get into the details yet because I know that's coming, but I just want everybody to understand that we're talking about different types, the same kind of group, but people call them different names. And they may have different objectives, which we're going to talk about that as well as we get into the study. Scott, I know Lifeway Research has been studying discipleship and groups ministry for, 2 decades now? Mm-hmm. Why is studying groups so important, and what is so essential about groups ministry to the church?
The most obvious would be it's the most common discipleship strategy churches utilize. So 94% of churches are utilizing ongoing groups throughout the year that are doing Bible study. But the other key piece of this is that these groups are transformational. Mm. So when we're studying churchgoers and we look at those that are in groups every week or almost every week compared to those that are not in groups, we see huge differences. Those people who are in groups are much more active in evangelism, much more active in service, both inside the church and outside the church. They're more active in just personal spiritual disciplines. They give more to the church. They have more relationships in the church. all those kind of things that discipleship-wise you want to be happening in your church, we see that groups are effective.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to talk more about that as we dive into the study. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's dive into the research findings. Ken, you've looked at the data and you've noticed, I'm sure, several things that you want to focus on today. What's the first insight that caught your eye when you were looking through this research?
Carol, I've got to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised that when it comes to the names that people have for their groups,
Yeah.
That good old-fashioned Sunday school was still right up toward the top.
Okay.
We have not thrown the baby out with the bathwater just yet. So I was really surprised. I have served at churches where the name Sunday school has been changed to something, well, like life groups is really what my last two churches have called them. But the term life group, Scott, it was way down the list. It was not even, I think even at the halfway mark, it was below that in terms of popularity. And so I was very surprised that Sunday school was as high as it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did that surprise you, Scott, as well?
I was expecting a mix, and we got a mix. And,
Okay.
and we ask it two ways. We let them tell us their name, and then we said, here's 6 generic titles. Which would be okay? Which would you go, yeah, that's our groups. And Bible study was the top. Adult Bible studies is the top. Sunday school, number 2. But then we also see small groups are strong. Adult Bible fellowships kind of drops down a bit for adult Bible fellowships, connect groups, and life groups. If we look at Southern Baptist churches, we actually see the top 2 switch places.
Okay.
So 3/4 of Southern Baptists would say, if you say Sunday school, you go, yeah, we've got those.
Okay.
Those groups. And half say, if you mention Bible studies, they're thinking of their ongoing groups. But for Protestants, it is Bible studies would be the top. And even when they're naming them, sometimes it's really specific names, like, it's Chaplain Dave's Bible study, or it's our women's Bible study, and those kinds of names kind of creep in even within the church having multiple.
Right. Yeah, I grew up in a church where they had Sunday school named after missionaries that our church supported.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Ken, with all of these different names, kind of zone us in. What are some key things that any group should be doing, regardless of the name, when we're talking about ongoing groups?
That's a good question, Scott, because I do think that there are some basics that groups should do. And I think churches, well, I was just in one last weekend, and they call their groups connect groups. And that's really what they want to do. In fact, they tell their people, we want to connect you to others. We want to connect you to Jesus and to Jesus' mission. So they're using that as kind of a mission statement, for their purpose of their groups. And I think some folks have changed the name, from Sunday school to like life group because they feel like we want what we do in the group to also make an impact on how we live our lives between Sundays, right? And so those are all, I think, properly motivated. But I've told groups and continue to tell groups, we do a group essentials conference, and that's one of the things we talk about are the purpose of groups. And in my breakthrough book, I said the premise is that groups ought to be doing 4 big major things if they want to have some level of success in doing great ministry. And I built it around the life acrostic. So, Scott, what I have told churches is, one thing you've got to do is to make sure that everybody in the group is learning and obeying God's word. And that really comes straight from the Great Commission, right? And it's not just about teaching and learning facts and factoids, but it's about learning it. And Jesus said, and teach them to obey it. And so it's not just about the education that goes on, but it's the education plus the application. The I stands for inviting others to become disciples. Lest we forget that, our Bible study groups many, many years ago were primarily, the church's outreach to the community.
They were doing a lot of evangelism.
A lot of evangelism. And I think that's something we could recover today. F stands for forming deeper relationships. And I think that's really important in 2 ways. It's important inside the group for people to come together and to become friends, to find those 2 a.m. friends, and not just be people from several zip codes that come together for about an hour and then they leave and they don't see each other again till the next week. So we form deeper relationships with the folks in our group. But at the same time, we don't forget that there's a lot of lost people around our churches. And so we want to also form deeper relationships with non-believers
Right.
for the purpose of introducing them and bridging them to the gospel and to our churches. And then the letter E stands for engaging in acts of service. And I've told groups that we want to get the people in the group serving the group. Lots of things need to happen besides just the teacher teaching. So we need someone to be a prayer champion, someone to be an outreach champion, a fellowship champion, those kind of things. But we also want to get the group engaged in service outside the address of the church, and that's somewhere in the community. And so I say, when you do all these four things, you're really doing some pretty great ministry, and none of those actually comes back to the group's attendance, which we have tended to make the big barometer for whether or not my group is successful.
Right.
And I say, hey, attendance is important. There's no way that it's not. But let's make sure that we're doing these other four things, whatever we call it. If we're doing these four, I think we're doing great group work. Yeah.
That's great. So life was your acrostic. So
Life was the acrostic.
Learn
and obey, God's word. Invite others to become disciples.
Form relationships.
Deeper relationships.
Deeper relationships with the people in your group, but also
engage in acts of service.
Yeah.
So we release folks to serve inside the church, but we also make sure our group is motivated and regularly engages with people in the community.
That's great.
A Saturday serve or something like that. I don't think we have to wait for the pastor or the church, some church leader to tell us, oh, here's going to be an emphasis. This. I think groups can self-direct and decide how they want to go and represent Christ in the community.
So another research finding that you guys focused on was around the frequency of group meetings, how often groups met. Scott, what did the survey reveal about frequency?
So 73% of these ongoing groups are meeting year-round or all year round except for a couple holidays.
Right.
So that's really the norm. Another 19% take the summer off, but otherwise they're meeting all year long. And a handful are doing a semester or trimester kind of thing. So with that kind of frequency, Ken, why is that important to be meeting that often?
I think first, it's important that people know that if I decide to show up on a Sunday, my group's going to be there. And they don't have to ask themselves or check the calendar and say, now, wait a minute, is this the week that my group meets? Because that has happened before, and it gets confusing. So I think it's easier for the people that are in groups and our guests that are coming to the church to just know, hey, if we're at the church is open, we're doing worship, we're also doing groups. And it makes it easy for them to know they've got a place. Yeah. I think also a friend of ours, David Francis, who was the former director of Sunday school here at Lifeway, David was exceedingly wise in his ministry as our Sunday school director. And he made this wonderful statement. I don't remember if he said it in a book or if he said it just stump preaching about groups. But he said, he goes, folks, discipleship should not take a week off.
Nice.
And that just really affected me. That it shouldn't. I mean, we ought to be meeting and gathering. And Scripture says, don't forsake your gatherings. Gathering is important. And I think also just for the consistency of it, that if you take a Sunday off, if your group's not meeting, I don't know, is it easier the next time you don't feel like getting up or it's raining or it's cold and you go, we don't meet every week anyway. I just like the regularity. I think it's a good spiritual habit to come and to gather. Yeah.
Some previous research that is published in the ebook Together, The Power of Groups, asked people why they're not in groups. And what we found is the majority of people who are churchgoers, but they're not in groups, actually had a good experience in groups. And so we really want to know, why'd you stop? And the top two reasons is there was a change in their life situation, but a close second was the group ended. Mm-hmm. So how does that play into this question of how often the groups should meet throughout the year?
Yeah, I think and I love the book, by the way. I use your book. You don't know it, but I'm using your book and the graphs and the charts in just about every conference that I do. Together, The Power of Groups has just become a great tool for me as a trainer. And it's a great information piece too, but it's such a nice, succinct book about, why people come to groups, why they leave. It's really, I think, so important that groups not take time off because, when they start to do that, like I said previously, you start to wonder, hey, is this the week that we're meeting or not? That's not very healthy. I also think that it gives people, Scott, you said in the book, you use the term off-ramp. And when a group ends, that could be an ongoing group, but it decides to, take a summer off or a semester off, it literally gives the people in the group a reason to exit. And then it becomes even harder sometimes to gather them back together after they've had some time off. My wife and I were looking just not too long ago for a church home here in the Nashville area, and had found one that we thought was going to become our church home. And then the group that we were in, the teacher announced, this was like mid-May, he said, folks, it's been great, and we'll see you in August.
Oh.
And I said, excuse me, what? what just happened? And he said, here at our church, he goes, guess no one's told you, but we take the month of June and July and half of August off.
Right.
And so see you after the summer's over. And I went, oh, okay. And on the way home, I asked my wife, I said, do we want to take almost 3 months off? Or do we want to find another church that's got ongoing groups? And it just didn't feel right to me to just stop. And so we found a church that had ongoing groups, and off we went. And so I love that philosophy, right, of meeting.
I could see where that would be really difficult for a new attendee who's just started coming to your church. They're
Right.
starting to get plugged in.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, the group that they're starting to invest in is no longer meeting. And that would really create some discontinuity for that new attendee.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And just think about it from a staff perspective. If the groups are starting and stopping, there's a lot of marketing and promotion you've got to do to, promote what's coming next, and when does that start, and when do the groups end, and what are my options. And it really gets a lot of our staff guys and gals on just on this rat race of always having to hustle, rather than just knowing, our groups are consistent. They meet every week except maybe for, 1 or 2 weeks out of the year. And that just seems to be a better plan for everybody,
Right.
staff and members and guests.
So I know this was not asked in the study, but just anecdotally, do you find that a lot of churches follow the school year with their groups and making decisions about, okay, it's fall break or it's spring break, we're going to take that week off and follow the school calendar? Is that something you see in your
That's a
work
good
with
question.
churches?
Yeah, they do. They try to be smart about that. Most of them don't take off Sundays, but they do take off the midweek.
Right.
They've got a Wednesday night meal or Wednesday night classes of some kind. Those typically are suspended during season, like a fall or spring break. But for the most part, the groups stay right with a school calendar. Still do Sunday school promotion in early August when all the kids go back to school. Adults, we lost that years ago. Adults never promote, so we just gave up on that. But usually early August is when there's an emphasis on training those new teachers. Everybody gets excited about the kids getting bumped up to their next grade level class. And a lot of churches use that opportunity to start those new groups as they come back off of summer break, or sometimes the first of the year is also a time that they do things like that.
All
But
right.
I think they do try to sync up.
Okay, that's great. Scott, we talked about the fact that Lifeway Research has been studying groups for 2 decades now. What are some things in this newest study that stood out to you?
I think a big thing is the percentage of people who are in groups. And we've been studying that question for a long time. And in fact, we asked pastors a year ago, Protestant pastors, and they actually gave us the same number that these group leaders said. On average, 44% of our congregation is in groups on a typical week. Those same Protestant pastors, well, not them, but another representative group, back in 2008, it was at 50%. So it dropped from 50 to 44% in about 15 years.
Okay.
And we're seeing the same trend in the Southern Baptist denomination, where those two questions are asked every year. What's your typical worship attendance? What's your typical Sunday school attendance? And in the mid-90s, it was as high as 85%. The most recent annual numbers from the churches, again, a census of churches, is at 60%, and this research was at 59%. So Southern Baptists are a little higher than average. But still, the trend line that we're seeing is for fewer and fewer people to be in ongoing groups. Again, whatever you're calling them, Sunday school or Bible studies or small groups.
Right.
So with that big trend line coming in, I think it kind of gives us pause, and the churches were giving us a percentage. So if you look at the bar chart, you see more people on the less than 50% side. But Ken, let's just imagine this. Let's kind of bring it to reality. If you were to step into a church this Sunday that had 20% of their congregation in groups, and the next week you went to a church where 80% of their congregation was in groups, what would you expect the difference to be?
Well, you had mentioned some things early on in the webinar. I would expect that the church that had the 80% engaged in a group would probably have higher per capita giving. You would see more generosity in the finances of the church. You would see probably more new groups being started in that church that's running 80% versus churches that don't have a plan for that. If the church was running 20%, there would be alarm bells ringing, and I would wonder if there's something to do with the quality of the teaching, perhaps, and maybe that would indicate that there's a higher level of training that is needed if you've only got 20%. There's other reasons maybe for this, right? They might have a strategy that says, a lot of our groups or the majority or maybe all of them are off-campus groups. We do things on campus for the kids, but the adults were off campus. And so if that's the case, maybe that philosophy is not resonating with the people. And I've seen churches where that has happened. In fact, there's one here locally that has struggled for years to get past 30% of their people to engage in groups because they've had an off-campus philosophy. It added another night of the week to a family's spiritual schedule, and it just didn't resonate with the people.
Yeah. So given that so many churches need to get more people into groups, what tips do you have for churches as they try to do that?
So I would say that whatever is important to the pastor is what becomes important to the church. And I love what our pastors do in the pulpit. They have that singular message, that the Lord has given them for the church. But most of them could do a little bit more from the pulpit to talk about groups, to incorporate this idea, this seed planting, as they preach throughout the year, when they have those opportunities and where it makes sense, to encourage the congregation to be in a group. And as they're saying that to the congregation, they're also saying it to the guests, which is a healthy thing. We want our guests to be in our Bible study groups as well. So a lot of it falls to our senior leader to make sure that the church knows that groups are important to him. If he doesn't say that, it could be that the congregation, just thinks that, well, he never talks about it, so maybe it doesn't need to be as important, to me and to my family. So that's one thing. But then I'd also say we need to be very clear on what our options are. People need to be able to go to a website, pick up a brochure. They need to understand what are the options if I choose to go to a Bible study group. And Scott, in your book, Together, the Power of Groups, you mentioned that I think it was close to about 70% of people that come to our churches, they're open to the idea of coming to a Bible study group.
Yeah.
But the really the best thing that we can do to get people into groups is what has been done for 100 years, everything since we ever started tracking this, and that is to invite people to come to our groups. It has been and still remains the number one reason why people come to our groups. I think 47% of people that come to our groups come because somebody either in the group or the group leader or somebody in the congregation said, hey, if you don't have a group, come to our group. And that's a very powerful thing when there is a culture of invitation in our churches. That's when you start seeing a lot of folks moving into and shifting into groups.
Yeah.
Solid.
Yeah.
Scott, I want to go back to that trend that you just talked about, the fact that in the 90s, about 80%
Among Southern Baptists, yes,
were in some kind of group, and today that's around
6 out of 10 for Southern Baptists, and again 44% for for Protestants.
Right. Any insights into why you think that trend line has decreased that way?
I think it coincides with similar trends we're seeing in our culture, where people are very individualistic in America and happy to kind of go on our own. And so relationships, when people are asked on other surveys how many quality relationships you have, people have fewer and fewer of those. And so some people are actually looking to fix that in their lives, and others are pretty content to keep going alone, as the Lone Ranger here, as Americans like to do. And so I think we've got to remind people not only the value of groups, but the value of church itself.
Right.
That Jesus Christ asked us to follow him, and individually we have to make that decision, but he asked us to follow him together with other believers. And relationally, that happens in groups.
Yeah. So there may need to be some education of the people who are sitting in our pews of why it's important to be engaged with others in your church community.
Yeah, so let me tell you something funny that I do with that, Carol.
Okay.
I lead our church's new member class, right? So people are coming. They've come to what we call a discovery lunch. No obligation, just come, meet the staff, hear about the church. If they want to take another step when they get ready, there's an official membership class. And in the membership class, pretty early on in that hour and a half that I've got with them, I share a research statistic that Dr. Tom Rainer produced when he was our CEO.
Right.
And I tell them, kind of tongue in cheek, but I say, look, if you want to mess your kids up, I'm going to tell you how to do it. And so they're all like, what? That's not why we're here. But it causes them to pay attention, right? And I say, here's what you do. I said, just make coming to church and being involved in a group something that you just kind of do whenever you feel like it. Don't be committed to it. And I said, I will promise you will most likely mess your kids up really good. And here's why. Dr. Rainer's research revealed that if you had 100 new people dropped off at your church, they all joined on one Sunday. And he said, let's look down the quarter of time, 5 years. How many of those 100 are still here if they're not in a group?
Okay.
And the numbers are staggering. So here's what they discovered. If you join that church, you don't get involved in a group, you're just going to come do big church, and do church in an hour. In 5 years, only 16 out of the 100 people are still around. But if the same 100 said, you know what, we're going to get involved in a group, 83 of the 100 they're still in the church, still findable, and still active members. And so I tell parents, I said, if you would like to mess your kids up, just make church occasional. Make being in a group something that's just kind of optional, and just come do church in an hour. And I guarantee you that'll pretty much do it. And you'll be calling us in about 10 years and wondering, how can we help you get your wayward college student or that 30-year-old kid that you've got now with a grandchild back into church because they don't seem to want to go to church. So I said, let's don't do that. Let's make group attendance, group membership really important. Let us help you get connected to groups in our church. And lo and behold, if they would not, at the end of that thing, sign up, yes, I want to become a member, yes, please connect us to a group. And we did.
Right.
We did. And I used that phraseology at a church that I was serving, 10 or 15 hours a week, just to help them with their group ministry. And so I wrote that into their new member material. I'm using it now at my current church, but that last church, it became the fastest growing Sunday school in Tennessee by percentage growth. So people want to know, so what did you guys do down there? What was the secret sauce? Well, part of it was we started, some new groups, a new Sunday school hour, but we also ran everybody through the new member class. And out of, 20 people that would come, 17, 18 would sign up, and we would get them connected to a group. So our Sunday school just exploded as people heard us say group involvement is really important.
Yeah, that's great. And from that research that you were talking about that Dr. Rainer did, groups are sticky.
Very much so.
Groups help people stick and stay engaged in the church.
They do.
And if they're doing the inviting you talked about earlier,
oh man,
they're a growth engine.
That's right.
And so we also see that percentage of your congregation that is in groups actually predicts a church's worship attendance 5 years out.
Oh, wow.
And so if you've got a higher percentage of your congregation involved in groups, again, they're so transformational.
Right.
It's going to predict that your church your worship attendance
Yeah.
is growing as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So healthy growth, a healthy group ministry means a healthy church.
Very much so. And especially like you said, if there's a culture of invitation, and that's just kind of what the congregation does. It kills me to look at our worship service right now, because I can spot guests, because they're actually the ones that read the bulletin.
Right.
I say, have you ever seen anybody reading a bulletin? That's probably a guest, And I said, somebody please go up to that person and invite them.
Right.
If they're our age, come to our group.
Yeah.
And we've actually had people do that in the just in the pew, congregation, looking up and down the rows, and they see somebody that they don't recognize, or they're reading the bulletin, they go up to them, invite them to our group. And we've seen our group grow just as we fish in the bathtub of the worship service.
Right. Yeah.
But then they've got neighbors, they've got coworkers, they've got people unconnected to the church that we could be inviting as well. Don't have to just do it in the worship service. So invitation works, the culture works, it definitely grows. And like you said, it sets us up for future growth as we're seeing that healthier group ministry. Yeah.
All right. We're going to move on to a fourth insight from the recent research findings. And that was about church size. And Ken, I know I've heard you talk about the importance of the size of a group.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular stat shows that most churches are not limiting the size of their Bible study groups.
That's right.
I think, if I'm looking at this correctly, 90% of Protestant churches don't limit the size of their ongoing adult Bible study groups. How should churches be thinking about church group size?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a preferable size churches should be looking for with their groups?
All right, good questions and very practical. So yeah, this actually did surprise me that 90%, so 9 out of 10 of our churches are not throttling back the group size in their philosophy of group ministry. And for me, that's a bit of a challenge because I think it sets us up for some failure in our group ministries. And I was in a church just this last weekend up in Oklahoma, did a group essentials conference, and they have a philosophy there that they want their groups to top out somewhere around 18 people. So their classrooms are designed on the smaller side.
Okay.
So that you can't get 30 people in it. I mean, if you get 15 to 18, you're pretty full. It is time to starting another group. And that's what they're doing. And they are running out of space. They're getting very creative, but they are launching new groups like crazy.
Oh, wow.
And so not every church can do that because you may have bigger classrooms.
Right.
And so those things do tend to just they get bigger. And if the church doesn't have a philosophy of, let's have that smaller to medium-sized group, well, then a group can be 30 or 40 people. And now you've got a mini church on your hands, right? So I don't like that. But you've asked a really good question about the,
What's the
optimal size.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to our former Sunday school director, David Francis, and then Rick Howerton, who was our small group expert.
Yeah.
And there's always this healthy tension between Sunday school people and small group people. Sunday school people tend to be Sunday morning at the church in a room.
Right.
Small group people tend to be living room off campus, not Sunday, right? And so the two groups kind of, have a friendly competition. They feel like each of their philosophies for groups is best. And so David and Rick surveyed back in the day, hundreds of folks that were involved in both camps.
Okay.
And here was the amazing thing. They actually agreed that the optimal size for a group is, drum roll please.
All right, let's hear it.
12 plus or minus 4.
12 plus or minus 4.
So anywhere
8 to
between
16.
8 to 16
Thank
people.
you for doing the math for me, Scott.
Yeah, 8 to 16 people. So 8, would be a great size in a Sunday school classroom, or it would be a great size in a setting like we're in right now, kind of a living room setting, right? We probably have enough couch space and chair space in our homes to take care of that. But on the upper end, 16. And here's why I think this is important. Most of our group leaders are comfortable leading a smaller group. The bigger it gets, the fewer people want to be in front of 20 or 30 people, and it becomes much harder to recruit a new group leader. But when you say, hey, Carol, we've got a group of 8 that needs a leader, then Carol's thinking, well, I can do this. It's like having conversation. It's easy.
Right.
I'm not doing a big presentation. I'm not preaching. It's a group of friends kind of a thing.
It seems more relaxed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. and they get to know each other,
Yeah.
in ways that a bigger group just can't.
True.
There's so many good reasons to keep it to a medium to small-ish size. So not a fan of, giant supersized groups. In fact, the one that I'm a member of right now, Tammy and I walked into it. They were very welcoming, but this group is just too big. And we run about 40 people in this group.
Oh, wow.
And for the last 2 years, I've been having conversations with the 2 other teachers. I'm in a little teaching rotation. And I would love to see us take that group and become at least 3 groups.
Okay.
Wow.
I was going to ask, so what do you do
Yeah.
if you have a large group?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, you start having those conversations about the benefits and the need to break it down into smaller smaller subgroups.
Yeah.
It is not the easiest thing that churches ever do, but it's the right thing to do.
Right. Which, if you've got a group like that, the leader really should be probably looking for future leaders in that group so that they can kind of take a group and multiply
That's right.
that group.
Well, let's take mine for example. There's 3 of us in a teaching rotation. We could each take a third of that group, and we could each then recruit a new apprentice and grow those groups back up and start some new ones. And that's what we need to be doing.
Right. So that brings us to our 5th and final topic for today, which is not enough groups are being started. We found this in the study. 34% said they have started new ongoing Bible study groups in 2024, which seems pretty low. So what have we learned about this important part of group ministry, starting new groups?
Yeah, so this is something we really camp out on at our Group Essentials conference. In fact, we spend 2 sessions, which turns out to be probably 2.5 hours or more, on the topic of starting those new groups. So here's what we know from experience, research, anecdotal experience as we have led groups ourselves. We know that every new group that a church starts is going to reach on average about 10 new people. So Tammy and I started a group, and it was a paper class. I don't recommend it. It's a hard way to start a group. It's when the church gives you a list of people not coming, and they go, hey, look, these have like a 0% attendance. And that's a hard way, because we struggled, and I didn't think we were going to make it. We finally got enough critical mass, and we hung in there long enough, and the Lord was gracious and brought us people. But if you'd walked into our group early on, we had about 6 people in there on any given Sunday. So you might have said, well, look, Ken, you say 10 people on average. Look, you got 6. But we all have these little things in the back seats of our cars called children. So while we reached, 6 adults, they had kids. We actually probably reached about 15 or more people overall. So the whole group ministry, would grow. So we know that on average, 10 new people. So a church wants to grow by 20, Scott. The simple math is start a couple of new groups, 10 each, right? Is how we would typically do that. We know that new groups tend to be more outward focused, Carol, and they're looking to grow. They're looking to be evangelistic. They're looking for that person who's not connected. And so we find that is a good thing and a good reason to start those new groups. We also know that when people get in those new groups, there's a lot of open spots for people to lead, Scott. And so they become that prayer leader for the group or the fellowship leader. And we see people using their spiritual gifts, right? Yes. But I think here's one of the best reasons why churches ought to start new groups. And that is because a new group is going to help the church overcome what I've called in training the Lego factor. Okay? So you think about
Explain.
this. So most groups, when they hit 18 to 24 months of being together, they're about as big as they're going to ever be. And at around the 24-month mark, they tend to, even though they've been evangelistic and excited about reaching new people, something happens, and around 2 years together, they begin to turn inward. And they don't think about lost people as much. And the reason is they've done pretty much what the church has asked. They have prayed together, they've served together, they've been to lunch together, they've fun together, they've traveled together, and they just get close. So when new person comes into the group, just like a Lego, everybody has a certain number of relational connecting points. There's only so many relationships you can handle. And I've always heard somewhere between 7 and 8 are what experts will say. That's really where we most of us top out.
Right.
And we just don't have more time or emotional energy for new people. So when Tammy and I first moved to Nashville and we started looking for churches, we would go to group after group after group in churches trying to connect there, as we're also trying to find a church where we feel like the Lord wanted us to be. And I'm not kidding when I say this. I've said this in conferencing and in books. On most Sundays, and this sounds so improbable, we could be in a group and not a single person in the group would speak to us. But we would watch them and listen to them have their conversations with one another.
Right.
And I would ask the question on the way home, what is going on? Why are these people being so rude to us? And I finally realized they weren't trying to be rude to us. They just had learned to love each other.
Right.
They didn't know if we were like, members that had just, come back, or were we prospects, or what were we? They probably didn't want to embarrass themselves. They just didn't talk to us.
Yeah.
So what I have found is it is great to start those new groups, because in new groups, not everybody's all legoed up with each other.
Yeah.
So we send our guests, our newest members, to those groups that are the newest. And that tends to be where people get legoed up and they get to stick.
Yeah.
And I've seen us send them to groups that have been older and established, and they just the new guest bounce off. And in 2 or 3 weeks go, hey, where's the Jones couple? And they just didn't connect, and they've tried another group or another church, and they're gone.
Yep.
So the back door was wide open for them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. New groups, we cannot say it enough, are the future, I think, of our churches. They're going to make or break us.
Yeah.
So we got to start those new groups.
That's great. Scott, before we move into people's questions, any stats that jumped out to you that you wanted to share, talk about?
A really similar stat to the percentage of churches that start a new group is the percentage of churches that identified a new leader.
Oh, okay.
Just a couple percentage points higher, and
Yeah.
obviously related. You can't start a new group without somebody to at least
To lead it.
facilitate,
Yeah.
to at least
To facilitate or
kind of
lead.
get it going. And so that's a challenge churches face as well, is finding a leader, both for those new groups and for existing groups where somebody steps away.
Yeah. All right. I'll tell you what. You ready to take some questions?
Let's do it.
Okay. So, first question. Lots of younger couples in our church, which leads to challenges in childcare for small groups outside of Sunday school where nursery is offered. How are others overcoming this challenge?
They're not.
Okay.
I'm just going to be honest. They're not. If somebody has figured this out, we could write the book. Let's get the royalties. Let's just retire. And here's the deal. That has been the perennial issue in off-campus groups, is what about the kids? Because it's not just an issue of, who's going to wrangle them. But honestly, there are some legal issues. There's some safety, security issues, that we need to be thinking about as we put kids upstairs in the bonus room with a
Right.
babysitter or whatever. And, little Johnny Buford comes downstairs and he's bumped his head and he's got a big knot on it because they were running around and all this. So in addition to, the safety concerns
Right.
like that, then you've also got are we just trying to manage the chaos, or are we trying to in some way disciple the kids while we've got them in the bonus room upstairs while the adults are downstairs? And if we're trying to do that, what's the age range swing? Because,
Right.
Trying to teach, a older preschooler and then somebody in 4th grade, that is, y'all know, way different animals, right? So it leads to a lot of challenges. So what some churches have tried to do is to put money in the budget to provide, trained childcare workers that can come
Right.
to that home and be there. Others have tried one group coordinating and adopting another group. And so when one group meets,
The other group is watching
providing the child care, and that
and
is
teaching the kids.
yeah,
That's
and-
great.
yeah, and so it requires a high level of coordination
Yeah.
and commitment, to be honest. But I didn't mean to be rude at the first of that
No.
answer, but it really is true.
It is a challenge
It's a
for
challenge,
churches.
and it's going to be a challenge. But churches are finding ways to work around that, if that's the philosophy that they want to have for when the adults gather.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So here's another question. Limiting the size of groups requires that someone, in effect, breaks fellowship with some others. So are relationships less important than controlling group size?
Are relationships less important than controlling group size?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. The group size, I think, is going to help that church make sure, Carol, you used the word sticky earlier. And I think that smaller to medium-sized group provides that place where people cannot hide out. And if they can't hide out, and if they are known to the other people in the group, then when they are absent, then they can be reached out to. Someone notices, that the Jones couple was not here. Who's going to reach out and find out if they're okay, sick, traveling, they have a need, and things like this? I think it's a two-sided coin, to be honest. I think that churches have to have a strategy and a plan for starting those new groups. And yes, and it's legit. When you start those new groups, there is a break in fellowship as a new fellowship is created over
That's
here
true.
in that new group. And so it's legit to say that people often don't want to do the starting of new groups because they have there's this real sense of loss.
Right.
That, hey, we've really enjoyed being with you for the last year and we don't want to leave.
Yeah.
But some folks, they get that missionary mindset. They have that entrepreneurial spirit. They hear a message or someone says something, it's important, is what Jesus wants us to do to reach new people, make those disciples. And there are people in our churches, I think, that will step up and start those groups and be those pioneer spirits. And it's always going to create some level of break in fellowship and feeling of loss. But also on the other side of that is there's that new thing that's happening in that new group where there are new connections and new relationships that are being formed.
Right. And you're still connected through the larger body of the church.
Absolutely.
You can still, you have to be more intentional about making sure that you're continuing those relationships with the members of your group that you've left and to start a new group. But
Yeah.
So.
I'm telling my adult leaders right now at our church, I'm not sure where the idea of permanence ever came from, but it's in the church. And there are some people that just feel like, hey, my group's going to be together until Jesus comes back. And we're trying to reconvince our people that that's not the goal, to be together forever. The goal is to make disciples.
Right.
And that can be messy and painful and uncomfortable. And it may require us to make some sacrifices, like leaving some friends that we don't really want to leave, but we're going to do it because there's a higher calling to make disciples.
Right. That's great. Scott, do you have stats on the average age of group attendees?
We do not.
No. Okay. All right. Just a question that came in. So, this particular person said that they have a strong group ministry in their church, but 2/3 of our attendance is 60 plus, which he or she, I'm not sure, finds concerning looking ahead to the future.
We have plans to do some young adult research this
Okay.
coming year, but
right.
Definitely one of the dynamics is if young adults come into a church and they're not seeing other young adults, or there's not groups for them that have young adults, it's hard for them to feel like they fit. And so that's a constant challenge because people age out of that. And so, yes, we used to have a great young adult group in our church or two, and now they've moved to the next age bracket. And so as a church, we've got to start new groups just to keep the youth there, to keep the young adult vibe. So when they step in, they feel at home.
All right. I'm going to ask you this question. We didn't go over it today, but I know that you asked this question, and now I've lost it. Oh, are your groups all Bible related, or do you see interest groups? So how do groups tend to get together?
So we did anchor in this set of questions. We referred to these all the way through as ongoing Bible study groups. And so Bible study was definitely a part of these. Now, when we asked them, how do they group people up? Is it all by age? We actually see a real mix there. Age and life stage are very, very common. A couple others that are common is to split male and female. And that kind of breaks down some of those, I have to have something for my age group because now we're bonding, over guy things and female things rather than always an age group thing. But another grouping is by affinity. And so that while those groups may have extra activities to do together, like pickleball or watching Monday Night Football or something, we're still talking about Bible study groups. And so they are getting together for Bible study on a weekly basis.
Ken, any thoughts on how churches should approach how they group people together, whether it's by age or affinity or life stage?
Definitely have some thoughts. And here's what I'll say is I've done it all those ways.
Yeah.
And so what I've tended to do is with our younger adults, group them by life stage. So we would have groups for parents of preschoolers, newlyweds, parents with grade school kids, parents of teenagers or middle school and high school, if you can break them up that way, empty nest adults. And then as we get past empty nest, then I tend to switch over to more age graded, men and women's classes, either co-ed or single gender, like adult guys, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, 80 plus, that kind of thing. And that's worked pretty good. We found that with the younger adults bonding around their children, they're seeing them probably at school, on the soccer fields, those things. It just gives them some instant connection, and it gives them playmates, and it helps that part of group life and fellowship happen more quickly when you can get the children together, then the adults hang out and talk. And so I've done it all those ways. You mentioned affinity groups. I have done some of those as well. We've even used some short-term groups, which I don't typically recommend ever doing short-term groups, Scott, for the reasons you mentioned. You go 4, 8, 10, 12 weeks, class is over, people scatter. But I have used some of those short-term groups, Carol, in order to start an ongoing group. So you started a parent group and over a parenting issue or a marriage class. It's about 6, 8 weeks, but we're doing it on a Sunday morning in a classroom with the full intent that around, let's say week number 6 of 8, we start talking to those folks about continuing on as an ongoing group. So there's a little, method behind the madness. Nice. So we start sometimes those short-term groups to turn them into, an ongoing group.
So I had a couple of questions that came in about leadership development and training.
Okay.
Did the research say anything about what churches are doing regarding leadership development, and how are new group leaders being trained?
Scott, do you want to take that one?
I'm not remembering all the numbers. We did ask about how they trained, and the numbers are not very stellar. There's not a lot of training going on, and many churches are very passive with it. Like we have some books available. There's some videos available, but it's not proactive. And so we do see some churches doing proactive, but again, the frequency can be a little sparse, just once a year or twice a year. What do you recommend in that regard, Ken, as far as what's healthy, what's going to bring the healthy dynamic we've been talking about?
Definitely have an opinion about this. And so here we go.
No kidding. You have an opinion
how
about
about
training
that? I've got an opinion
leaders.
about this one.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to something the state of Georgia did. Their Southern Baptist Convention in Georgia, Georgia Baptist Mission Board years ago, did a survey of 2,544 churches. And they asked a couple of questions. Number one, they gave them a 4-year window of time, and they said, how many folks did you have in year 1 versus year 4? Like, how'd you grow? And during that same period, how often were you training your group leaders? And I still refer to the research. I think this is very compelling reason to do it. Here's what they discovered. If a church was not doing training, they were actually declining in their group ministry by minus 2.1% over that 4-year period. However, if they were doing weekly training, they were growing at about a 6% rate over those 4 years. Not bad. But if they were doing quarterly or monthly training, either one, between 13 to 14% growth in their group ministries. Wow. And so and when I was on staff in Texas at a couple of churches, I practiced weekly training, and it was primarily to get my teachers ready to teach next Sunday's lesson. But when you're doing training quarterly or monthly, you can't do that. And so the training becomes then, how to share the gospel type stuff, or it's how to plan fellowships for your year, or how to be a welcoming group. So they're doing higher altitude leadership type things in those trainings that are really making a difference for the leaders and their groups. And so when I came to Tennessee and started working part-time with a church staff in their group ministry, there were a 16-year-old church, never had training. So I had a choice. Weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, never, what we're going to do. Well, I chose quarterly. Why? because I want to work smarter, not harder. I
Right.
felt 12 months, 12 times for a group that had never had training would be way too much.
Right.
And I didn't think once a year was enough. So we did quarterly training. And that little church became fastest growing in Tennessee by percentage growth
Wow.
over the 3 years that we were doing. We would have, almost 100% of our teachers show up for that noon on Sunday to about 2:30 p.m. Sunday time of training every quarter. And they loved it. They ate it up. So my opinion is quarterly is what I would do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes when people hear the training word, they're thinking everybody in the room is learning brand new stuff.
Yeah.
And especially for teachers that have been doing it for 10, 20 years, really what we're talking about is reminding
That's right.
and recommitting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we're in a room of people trying to do the same thing we are week in and week out, reach people and disciple them. And I'm being reminded, oh, I need to plan some fellowships. Reminded, oh, I've not actually given an invitation in a class to say, would you, if you've not come to Christ, and put that into words in one of the lessons recently, I need to do that. And so it's a reminding and asking people to recommit to it that keeps those healthy practices happening more common, more consistently across your groups.
Yeah, that's a very good word. And if anybody out there, Carol, is interested in how to train, how to set that up in our Group Essentials Conference, we do that. We help them develop a 3 to 5 year plan. And can I give a little commercial plug?
I was just going to say,
URL?
we had a question come in that
really?
said, how can we get information about the Group's Essentials
Okay, so
conference?
here you go.
Tell us.
Yeah, it's a simple URL, I think. It's lifeway.com/GRP. It's short for group. So lifeway.com/GRP Essentials. All one long run-on phrase, right? And you'll see the places that we're going to be next. I'll be in Marietta, Georgia, in about a week or so. We'll be in the Panhandle of Florida in January. We will be in Tennessee early in the spring, over to another part of western Georgia in March or April. And you'll see as we bring new ones online throughout the year, that's where we're going to open the registration up. We don't charge for this. It's a 2-day conference. We pretty much pay for everything for about 30 people to gather together. They need to be a pastor or a director of the group ministry for the church. And then we'll bless them with books on group ministry and give them a new Bible, and we'll spend 2 days hanging out talking about all things groups. And so we'd love to see folks there at these essentials.
So we had I'm going to kind of combine a couple of questions that came in. How do you determine the topics and duration of your lessons for your groups, and what can you talk about the importance of using some type of curriculum?
Mm-hmm. I can definitely do that too.
Okay, let's hear it.
Would it surprise you that I have an opinion about this? But I do. So I let Lifeway basically determine this for my church, because quite honestly, I got other fish to fry besides developing a curriculum plan. It's what Lifeway does. That's how the hardest work we do at Lifeway is to develop the scope and sequence for Bible Studies for Life, Explore the Bible, Gospel Project, everything else that we do. It's the hardest thing. But once it's done, there's the plan right there to march people through the Bible in an orderly fashion that makes sense for each of those curriculum lines. And every one of those is different. It's like the personalities of children in your home. Love them all, but they're all very different. And that's just how it is. But I trust that Lifeway has the experts. And I did this. I trusted Lifeway for 20 years before I ever came to Lifeway. They took that pressure off of me. Why? So that I could go and do things Lifeway couldn't do, like make hospital visits, go visit the sick, visit prospects, train my leaders. But I trusted Lifeway to take care of the scope and the sequence. So that's what I would recommend. Find a curriculum that you like. I think every one of the ones that we produce can work in almost any group. So I'd say do that.
And each of those has a different starting point. So
It
talk
does.
about the starting points and how one of those starting points might fit your church better than another.
Yeah. So I'll say it like this. When my mom was living and we would go out to Abilene, Texas to go visit her, my younger son loved to go with us. And so it'd be Tammy and I, Ryan would go with us. And Mom had this little steak place that she liked to go, so we'd always take her there.
Yeah.
But I had to put her on one end of the table and Ryan on the other, because Mom's philosophy of steak was she wants it
Charred.
way overcooked. Yeah.
Yes.
Ryan, though, on the other end, has a different philosophy. He likes his rare. And so you know how that goes. You bring it, and it is swimming in a pool of blood.
That's the way I want
And
my steak.
my mother, if she saw that, would get physically sick.
No.
And here I am in the middle, and I'm the medium well guy. I like just a little strip of pink. But every one of us would get up from the table to go home, and we would all say, we just had the best steak.
Yeah.
But the real deal is we like to eat our steak differently. Carol, groups are like that with Bible studies.
Yeah.
They've got preferences. So some groups love book by book. They want to go through chapter by chapter and as much verse by verse as they can.
Right.
And so for them, that's Explore the Bible. That's what Explore the Bible does. Then others would say, you know, we really want to know what the Bible says about a particular topic.
Right.
And so for us, that would be Bible Studies for Life. That's built in 6-week studies around particular topics. And then you move on to a different topic, and then a different topic. And then there's Gospel Project, the little brother to these other two. And Gospel Project came along in 2013, and it's a 3-year chronological trek from Genesis to Revelation. Yeah. Explore the Bible will do that, but in 9 years, but not chronologically.
Right.
And so you can see how they're all different, but all similar. They're all going to get Bible study done. But what I've seen is groups actually do have preferences. They do.
Yeah.
So when I came to Tennessee, started working at that little church, and found out that they were using all kind of Lifeway curriculum, I did not go in there and blow it up and say, hey, we all have to do Explore the Bible. I let them eat steak.
Yeah.
How they wanted to eat it. They were happy. I was happy they were using something good and conservative and theologically vetted. And it let me focus on other high altitude things to help the church and the Sunday school.
Well, Scott, Ken, thank you so much for digging into this research and for all the valuable insights that you have provided to us and to our audience. Audience, we want to thank you for joining us, and thank you for all the many ways that you care for your church and your groups and how you're making disciples. I hope that you will stay tuned for more webinars like this. It sounds like we could probably do a webinar on training. So maybe that's in the future. Be on the lookout for information about that. You can follow Lifeway Research at lifewayresearch.com. Be sure and sign up for our newsletter there, and you'll find out about more webinars like this. You can also read articles from Scott and folks like Ken who are providing valuable insights about church ministry. And again, we just want to thank you for joining us and being with us. I think that I have covered everything that I need to cover to wrap this up, and just want to say thanks again, and hope to see you soon on another webinar with Lifeway Research.